Welcome back to Transcriber from Reddit. Today's topic comes from the subreddit TrueReddit, posted by user CaveatElector73. This was posted 25 days ago. It is a linked post with the title, America Has a Child Marriage Epidemic, and it's even worse than you think. The tag for this post is a magenta policy plus social issues tag. Before I go into the article, I want to highlight a couple of very helpful comments down here. Some of it is sectioning off the article, whereas, for example, this one comment from Obscure Saint reads, 186 of 193 countries have ratified the CEDAW Treaty, spelled CEDAW. As of right now, I don't have a name for that acronym. However, it's important to note that, to continue reading, the United States shamefully remains as one of only 7 countries that has to date refused to ratify it. We join Iran, Sudan, Somalia, Nauru, Palau, and Tonga on this indefensible list. Therefore, CEDAW does not apply in the United States. And then another user, that's my company dog, responded saying, if you're looking at this list and thinking, quote, those small Pacific Island nations probably just don't have the resources to implement the law, and it's not a problem there, end quote, you are mistaken. In Tonga, 10% of girls are married before age 18, and girls who are married have extremely low education levels on average, parentheses, most have not finished primary school, end parentheses, and are 3 times more likely to live in poverty. In Nauru, the child marriage rate for girls is 27%, with 1 in 50 girls married before age 15. And while Palau talks the talk around sponsoring and implementing all sorts of international laws around this, it does not collect/report on the frequency of child marriages, does not ban child pornography, allows foreigners to marry girls as young as 16, and among women whose first sexual encounter was younger than age 15, 32% report that it was forced. Parentheses, data from https://girlsnotbrides.org and UNICEF, end parentheses. Now let's open up the article. It's a Substack article written by Kasim Rashid, Esquire, dated May 15th, 2024. Side note, with the election recently coming out as Donald Trump having won, and with his words talking about needing to protect women and girls, do you think that the United States would then join CEDAW and start enforcing no child marriage rates? Among the other topics I generally cover include sexual abuse and misconduct, especially in the Wells. The reason I do this is because it is not often talked about, at least in comparison to bigger churches and denominations, such as Doug Wilson, Hillsong, and the list just keeps growing every single year. But one of the things that religious denominations often find, or at least in my limited experience, they generally have overlap with alt-right and Islam, is the idea that women need to marry young, not just for fertility reasons, but also so that they don't get educated and decide that family and children are not for them. However, whenever you bring up cases where mothers abused and killed their own children, they wave it away saying that those women were not godly, or those women did it wrong, or those women are not the majority. Thankfully, because of recent research into pregnancy and the risks around pregnancy and childbirth, and the amount of women that have experienced and continue to experience postpartum diagnosis, is revealing what many women around the world have known for years, that childbirth is dangerous to women, that pregnancy often gives women life conditions that give women conditions for life that can sometimes be remediated, but oftentimes just cannot be ignored. And then postpartum diagnosis, that is just women being affected by all of the hormones and the traumatic process that is giving birth to children. And unfortunately, it affects not just them and their mental state, but also how they treat the vulnerable children that are now in their care. We can only hope that in the coming years here in the US, not only that child marriage would be banned, especially with the incoming administration saying that they're there to protect women and girls, but also that more science and more research will be funded to understand these kinds of problems that only affect biological women and girls. I start reading the article. The title is America Has a Child Marriage Epidemic, and it's even worse than you think. The subtitle underneath it reads, with more than 300,000 documented child marriages since 2000, Republicans are fighting to keep it that way. Children today have it rough. Today have it tough. Between grades, drugs, alcohol, and apparently the threat of child marriage. This isn't hyperbole. To this day in 2024, thousands of children are beholden to, obliged to, forced into, parentheses, what's the right word here, in parentheses, child marriage in the United States. And Republicans seem to want to keep it that way. With several thousand documented child marriages every single year, some involving as children as young as 10, we need, I think the author meant need. We need legislative solutions and penalties for those who exploit children. But where do we begin? Let's address this. The sentence, let's address this, is in italics. Below that, we see an image of a man who appears to be, due to the salt and pepper in his beard and receding hairline, in his mid to upper 50s, next to what appears to be a child as potentially as young as 12, wearing a veil and a wedding dress. He is smiling and she is not. Below the image is the description, passers-by are stunned by a social experiment stunt held in New York to highlight child marriage, parentheses, YouTube, and parentheses, via The Independent. I continue reading. In bold. First, let's truly understand how bad this epidemic is in the United States, end bold. Despite widespread condemnation and international treaties against it, child marriage continues in the United States unabated. As reported in numerous outlets, including the Washington Post and The Independent, linked here, quote, at least 207,468 minors are, 207,468 minors married in the U.S. between 2000 and 2015, according to data compiled by Unchained at Last, a group campaigning to abolish child marriage, linked here, and investigative documentary series Frontline, in italics. The true figure is likely to be much higher because 10 states provided no or incomplete statistics, end italics. The youngest wedded were 3 10-year-old girls in Tennessee who married men aged 24, 25, and 31 in 2001. The youngest groom was an 11-year-old who married a 27-year-old woman in the same state in 2006. Children as young as 12 were granted marriage licenses in Alaska, Louisiana, and South Carolina, while 11 other states allowed 13-year-olds to wed. More than 1,000 children aged 14 or under were granted marriage licenses, end quote. And the problem persists. Unchained at Last conducted another study in 2021 and found more than 300,000 documented cases of child marriage. Note the words more than 300,000 are in italics. As reported by Rolling Stone, linked here, quote, a 2021 study, linked here, by the advocacy group Unchained at Last found that 300,000 minors were married between 2000 and 2018 in the United States. According to the group, 60,000 of those marriages involved an age difference that would have otherwise been considered a sex crime, end quote. Remember, this is yet incomplete data, as 10 states do not adequately report this data. But there's yet another element of horror to this situation. In many states, children who are married cannot divorce, making child marriage a daunting one-way ticket. As divorce lawyer Nancy Zalewski-Berg explains, linked here, quote, a minor can't file for divorce because they're not considered old enough to do it. That's because marriage is considered a contract, and most laws stipulate that only adults can enter into contracts. So if a minor wants to change their marriage contract, they need an adult to help them do it, end quote. In bold. Next, let's understand the lead culprits perpetuating this injustice, end bold. Because while child marriage is a nationwide problem, Republican states lead the way. 9 of the top states leading rates of child marriage are GOP-run states. They are as follows, linked here. Quote, first, Nevada, at 0.671%. Second, Idaho, 0.338%. Next, Arkansas, 0.295%. Fourth, Kentucky, 0.262%. Fifth is Oklahoma at 0.229%. Sixth is Wyoming at 0.227%. Seventh is Utah, 0.208%. Eighth is Alabama at 0.195%. Ninth is West Virginia, 0.193%. And 10th is Mississippi, 0.182%. Side note, I expected Alabama and Utah to be higher up there, considering that Utah is notorious for Mormon marriages and for Mormons marrying extremely young, and especially their religiously abusive practice of considering marriages to be sealed in the temple. So I would expect that to be more of a Mormon problem. Also, Alabama, just for the joke of Alabama having cousins marrying cousins. And also, as a side note, you might say, well, it's less than 1%. Anything above 0.00% is a bad percentage, is too high of a percentage. These are children, whether male or female, they cannot consent. I continue reading. This epidemic persists under the radar, often defended and protected by lawmakers, particularly within the Republican Party, who cite tradition, religion, and a shocking misinterpretation of maturity and readiness. The latest absurd argument is that child marriage is better than abortion, notwithstanding that states that ban abortion also suffer at least a 24% increase in maternal mortality, linked here, and have the highest rate of infant mortality, linked here, as well. Facts just aren't the Republicans' thing. Controlling women and children is. West Virginia and Wyoming Republicans have also launched efforts to protect child marriage. And in New Hampshire, as recently as 2018, child marriage was legal for girls as young as 13 and boys as young as 14, linked here. This is particularly concerning because about 86% of child marriages are of young girls to male adults. Worse, efforts to ban child marriage in New Hampshire faced opposition from legislatures when 174 Republicans voted against a bill to ban child marriage. Note that the word against is in italics. One Republican lawmaker, State Representative Jess Edwards, described teen girls as, quote, ripe and fertile, unquote, horrifying remarks that I address below. Here's a video.
Why are Republicans so obsessed with protecting child marriage? This is not a hyperbolic question. I'm genuinely blown away. This week, a Republican in New Hampshire went on the House floor and argued against a bill to end child marriage. Take a listen.
Do you agree with the point of view that if we continually restrict the freedom of marriage as a legitimate social option, people who are of ripe fertile age and may have a pregnancy and a baby involved, are we not in fact making abortion a much more desirable alternative when marriage might be the right solution for some freedom-loving couple?
And there's 2 points I need to make here. One, up until 2018 in New Hampshire, the legal age for marriage for girls and boys in New Hampshire was 13 and 14. Yeah. Two, this is not isolated. A recent report found that from the year 2000 to 2015, there have been more than 207,000 documented child marriages in the United States sanctioned by the court and the church.
Note that in that he referenced a link from the Independent UK.
Finally, if Republicans are worried about children, how does marrying them solve the problem? That's horrifying. Anyway, fortunately, that bill in New Hampshire is passing. It is going to be signed into law, but not before 174 Republicans voted against it. Republicans, party of family values.
And here ends the video. I could not agree more. With more science that has been coming out about how brains need to continue to develop, and brains of children, and studies about how removing children, especially girls, from education before a certain age leads to riskier outcomes later in life, it just makes sense to ban child marriage. Of course, you're probably going to get saying, well, you can't control human fertility, people are only going to be fertile before a certain age, and you need to make advances or you need to have them procreate as soon as possible to continue the human race. First off, I'd like to point out that the world is over 8 billion people. The unchecked capitalism that we currently have going on means using up resources that we don't have a way of renewing. Perhaps what the solution is instead of pushing more and more people to have babies when they can't support them, and when we are looking at a future where it is possible that that number of lives can't be supported, maybe it's better to invest minds and research and money into research and development to figure out how we can build a more sustainable future. Also, if you encourage people to have kids, how does that enforce poverty levels? How does that affect their ability to take care of the kids? Let's also talk about the negative effects that oldest children tend to suffer, especially parentification and the therapy that they need and often can't afford because of the ways that the ways and the and how their families use and
Why are
manipulate their very presence to continue just abusing the ever living shit out of them, whether it's emotionally, financially, or physically. We need to continue to focus on building a better future for ourselves and for our children. And we are not at a point where we can say, well, we're good enough. We should continue to expect people to have children. And also say, we need to have child marriage. Child marriage is wrong. When you have children, having children, it's riskier outcomes for the mothers. It's riskier outcomes for the children themselves. And society doesn't have the I would argue any systems in place that would be on behalf of these child parents. We saw earlier that there was a link to the attorney saying that there's no legal help for minors being married because they are minors by law and they are considered to not be able to consent, let alone have any legal determination over their future. Let's also talk about medically, because the minor who is married to an adult, that adult becomes their parental guardian in a very sick, twisted way. So the minor could also quite possibly, especially through the trauma and the and all of the things that can happen to them through pregnancy and childbirth, they would probably need to have a lot of medical interventions, and at least the percentage of that is increased. And you're telling me that that the person that they married should be able to make those medical decisions, not the child themselves? What are those, at the very minimum, like what are those at least 300,000 minors supposed to do when they're married to an adult? Do we have universal health care? Do we have universal child care where they know that no matter what happens, they can walk in and get treated and they can have their children taken care of so they can maybe further their career, or they can work outside the home so that so at least when they turn 18 they have other options other than staying married, especially if abuse is a huge factor, or abuse could be a huge factor. Let's also not forget the reason why child marriages are often encouraged, because the adult has control over the child. The adult is seen by both the child's family and by their own family as the protector, the guardian of that child that they're marrying, and the final say in that very authoritarian household. That is not healthy. And that's not a society that encourages the production of a better future society. Moving on to the rest of the article after the video. Missouri tells a similar story where Republicans continue to block attempts to raise the marriage age by arguing for, quote, parental rights and traditional values, end quote, regardless of the immense harm to children. As reported by the Missouri Independent, linked here, quote, the current law allows children aged 16 and 17 to marry with parental consent and younger children to marry with a judge's approval. Until the legislature voted to raise the minimum marriage age to 16 in 2018, Missouri had among the most lenient child marriage laws in the nation, linked here, making it an especially popular state for 15-year-olds, linked here, to travel to be married. Despite the 2018 change, Missouri law still does not align with international human rights standards, which set the minimum age at 18. Around 70 minors every year are entered into marriage in Missouri, end quote. And the fact is, this hypocrisy extends beyond child marriage. The Republican Party, which often claims to champion the protection of children, also supports policies that endanger and undermine the well-being of minors. They are proponents of child labor laws, opponents of free school lunches for children, adversaries of the child tax credit, and critics of the Medicaid expansion, which disproportionately benefits low-income children. I made this point in a viral tweet last year. linked here. Its virality indicating that many people see this hypocrisy for the cruel reality that it is. Below that is a screenshot of his tweet. That reads, GOP, we protect kids. OP, so ban child labor? GOP, no. OP, ban child marriages? GOP, no. OP, ban children from carrying guns? GOP, no. OP, ban gun sales without background checks? GOP, no. OP, then how do exactly protect, this is a little convoluted, excuse me. Then how exactly do protect kids? With thinking emoji face. GOP says, we ban books, discussions on racism, drag, and free school lunch. It was originally posted on March 15th, 2023 at 8:27 p.m. I don't know about you, but ban child marriages is a huge red flag for me. That is the bare minimum expectation of a good politician. I continue reading. But surely there are international laws that ban child marriage, right? Well, it's sort of a good news / bad news situation. The good news is, yes, there are international laws and treaties that ban child marriage. For example, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, parentheses, CEDAW, end parentheses, calls for action to specify a minimum marriage age of 18, linked here. Therefore, any U.S. state law which forces minors into marriage is a de facto violation of CEDAW. The tragic bad news is that while 186 of 193 countries have ratified the CEDAW treaty, the United States shamefully remains as one of only 7 countries that has to date refused to ratify it. We join Iran, Sudan, Somalia, Nauru, Palau, and Tonga on this indefensible list. Therefore, CEDAW does not apply in the United States. Meanwhile, no federal legislation exists to ban child marriage in the United States either. In bold, finally, let's talk solutions, in bold. Because, all of the above notwithstanding, Democrats aren't off the hook either and must do better. As documented by UNICEF, linked here, only Connecticut, Delaware, Massachusetts, Michigan, Minnesota, New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, Vermont, and Washington have banned child marriage under the age of 18. That leaves 39 states where child marriage is still legal and recognized. Excuse me. It's long past time for change. Children forced into child marriages are often helpless, but we as adults are not. So what can you do? The leading organization to help pass bans on child marriage is Unchained at Last. Visit their website, linked here, sign up for their newsletter, and if you can, contribute to their cause. Likewise, call upon your lawmakers to end this harmful practice and align with modern standards of human rights and dignity. We can do so by pressuring state lawmakers to ban child marriage on the state level, pressure federal lawmakers to pass national legislation banning child marriage, parentheses, and let the Supremacy Clause quash all child marriage laws, end parentheses, and pressure the White House and Congress to ratify CEDAW and bring the United States up to speed with the vast majority of humanity. Experts estimate that in 2024, roughly 50 minors will be forced into a child marriage every week in the United States. Note that the words every week are italicized. That number must come down to 0. It is critical we continue to speak up, create more awareness, and bring about this life-saving change for human rights in the United States. Here ends the article. Below that reads in bold, I hope you found value in this article. Let's address this with Kasim Rashid is a reader-supported publication. To receive new posts and support my work, consider becoming a free or paid subscriber. I will link the Unchained at Last website in the description notes below, as well as also the Reddit article and the original link for Rashid's article. Hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you again in the next one. Thank you.